let's start that over.
Which? Axle snappers.
Oh, axle snappers.
Yeah, sorry.
So welcome to the Year in Psychology and Gaming. I see some familiar faces. I did a presentation like 2 hours earlier, so welcome back. And it's going to be the same little opening spiel, so bear with me. We are talking about psychology and games, but sometimes when you talk about psychology, you talk about topics that people may find distressing or upsetting. So we are not going out of our way to do that to you, but since we are talking about mental health issues, we are going to talk about mental health issues. So at any point you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, please feel free to get up, do whatever you need to do to feel safe and comfortable. I think the AFK room is just around the corner as well. So just kind of our, safe space, but do what you gotta do to feel safe. So my name is Kelli Dunlap. I'm a doctor of clinical psychology, and I'm also currently a master's fellow at American University, and I'm getting my degree in game design. So I did my dissertation work on the intersection of mental health and video games. I've written some stuff. I worked in the VA, did work with vets on video games as well. And I write stuff about that, and every now and then. And so I'm going to hand it over to my buddy here, Josué.
Hey guys, I'm also Cardona, and I have a master's in mental health counseling. So I'm not a psychologist, I'm a practitioner, not a researcher. And I do a lot of stuff with psychology, so I've written stuff for a couple of books and collaborated with some people, and it's all related to pop culture and geek culture and psychology, having a practice, stuff like that. And a few years ago, I created a website called Therapy, and it came out of frustration when I was an intern working with children, and we had a Nintendo Wii at this clinic I was working at, and I had so many ideas of things that we could do, how we could use it for good, and my supervisor just thought that it was evil and we couldn't do it, so I got mad and I made a website. And there's one picture in the top corner there where I'm my face on Galacticus. That's a really weird photo that a friend of ours called Ali, he is actually running for president of the American Psychological Association, so it's very topical. That's why I kind of put it there. We made a video on psychology and video games on YouTube. You can check that out. And he made that picture because I told him I love all consoles. Everything, and so he made that. He thought it was very funny. And we joke on, we do a podcast, we'll talk about that later. And we joke around a lot about how she's very Xbox friendly, yes, and I'm more PlayStation friendly. Yeah, but I
love that Ali's Photoshop skills are still on point.
Oh, he's fantastic. Yeah, if any of you are members of the APA, vote for him because he made that thing.
Obviously, you won't make Photoshop for APA great again.
Yeah. And at least, so I like to start every presentation with some ESA facts, essential facts. These are the 2015 ones. The 2016 should be coming out too. This is the Entertainment Software Association. So Kelli, what are some of your highlights of the?
Well, I know the stats tend to change. I mean, if you're talking to psychologists and you tell them that, did you know that the average age of a gamer is 35? Like, no way. But at a place like here, you're like, well, yeah, duh. And as always, the male-female ratio is always really important to me as far as facts go. The fact that, it is almost a 50-50 split. And if you were to look at something like mobile gaming, there's actually more women on mobile gaming than there are men. So the fact that games are such a diverse place, and if I remember the number right, there's 155 million Americans who play video games. On average, 42% of them play for 3 hours a week or more, and they're considered regular gamers. And for context, that's more than half of the US population. So chances are, the person sitting next to you is probably a gamer. Okay, wow, I'm on fire right now. Go me.
Yeah, so when we talk about behavior and psychology, it's good to know that you're not just talking about kids, you're talking about games. And I like the stat that there are twice as many adult female gamers as there are young male gamers. Again, that may not be news to people here, but outside of here, here's some more facts. 59% of parents play video games. 116 million gamers play on a smartphone or other mobile device. I mean, the ESA facts are really, really good to just tell people to shut up, and they tell you, like, oh, you play games. You know, everybody does. And so I just like to start with that. So let's go with this guy.
I want to know, does anybody in here know who this is? What's his name?
Philip Zimbardo.
Yes, give that man a cookie. I don't have anything. I have my husband, you can take him if you want. No? No, okay.
For everybody else, this guy is a living legend in psychology. If you've ever heard of that Stanford prison experiment, they made a movie last year about it. 80% on Rotten Tomatoes, I checked yesterday.
That's actually pretty good.
Yeah. And the last year, this guy that speaks for psychology, when he speaks, people listen. He said he came out with a new book and he was promoting it. And what did that book talk about?
It talked about how video games are destroying the lives of young boys. Yeah. I bet you didn't know that, did you? That your lives have been destroyed.
The title is Man Disconnected, How Technology Has Sabotaged What It Means to Be Male. And that followed up his TED Talk called The Demise of Guys. Very clever.
So my personal favorite from that was when he was talking about how boys are failing academically. And it's not because, they're being forced to learn, to the test or, anything like that. It's because of video games. And so now it's unfair that women are succeeding more than men. And that apparently really bothered him quite a bit. But obviously there's a problem, and it's video games. So let's blame them. And he went on a BBC talk show and was promoting his book. And we, one of our podcast episodes, how did you describe this, sweetie? An hour-long rage fest against Cardona. So again, wonderful person, human being, probably. But this was a big contentious piece in 2015 because again, as has been mentioned, when he speaks, people listen. When they think of psychologists, they think of Freud and Zimbardo pretty much, or Milgram. But yeah, it was this entire focus on how video games are destroying the lives of young boys because boys would rather play video games than go out and be rough and tumble with other boys, or they might ignore girls, which obviously is detrimental to being male. How did you feel about that, Josué? As a man, tell me, how did that make you feel?
Yeah, it was everything that he said was incredible. I mean, it was offensive to men, to women, to humans. It was just unbelievable. And honestly, so we did a whole hour-long podcast on this, and I think we were kind of freaking out. And we thought, one of us said, this may set us back like 5 years in terms of like getting gaming accepted. But honestly, like in the news, nothing happened. Nobody talked about it after that.
And the backlash was actually from people like Dr. Chris Ferguson and Dr. Shabilsky. Really, this is terrible. And it was, and a lot of news organizations picked it up too, that, hey, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So it almost had a pro-video game spin to it because he did seem so out of touch, which I think really says something about the gaming community right now. Because I think if this had been pitched 10 years ago, it would have been, yes, of course, yes, Dr. Zimbardo. But now games are such a part of our culture, and we've come so far in terms of understanding them academically, that this really did seem as out of touch as it actually is.
Yeah, I didn't see a single example in the media where someone was like, oh, he's the guy that knows. Because I'm like, I don't know, didn't know I changed already? Are we good with games? Don't all our kids play? Don't we play? So, but it was kind of a big deal, and the book did come out. I haven't read it, and I didn't watch the movie because I'm still angry.
Do we need to talk about this process?
But then, thankfully, on the completely opposite side of whatever the spectrum is, right, anti-gaming, we had another book come out last year.
Hopefully more people recognize her. Oh, yes. All right. Yes. So, as you guys all know, this is Jane McGonigal, and she is a magical unicorn, and I love her so much. She wrote a book in 2009 called Reality is Broken, and that actually was the foundational inspiration for my dissertation. It's a little personal story there. And she actually released a book last year called Super Better. And for anybody who's familiar with her, Jane McGonigal suffered a really bad concussion several years back, and she had suicidal ideation. She was incredibly depressed. She's a writer, and she couldn't write. She just kind of was bedridden for months. And she's quoted as saying that she was either going to make a game out of this or she was going to die. Thankfully, she made a game out of it. And the game she made was called Super Better. And it was a phone app that you can actually get right now. And it had empirically based, well, it now has empirically based treatments in it. But she had her friends and family create quests for her for things that she could do that were on the level of where she was at cognitively, and it helped rehabilitate her. And she put it up and she shared it with the online gaming community, and the response was so positive that she took this idea of Super Better and took it to NIH, the National Institute of Health, when it completed its trial last year, and she wrote a book about it. So this book itself is all about this game that she created to help her deal with her concussion, but you can also use it, people have used it for weight loss, for health, for depression, for anxiety, just to kind of level up her life and keep herself on point. It's also been used for that. And now it has the backing of the NIH as an empirically validated study.
Yeah, and the app has been around for a while, and I don't think that the book is Super Better, the game, the book. Right? It takes all the ideas that were very useful from that game and applies them. The title of the book, the subtitle is A Revolutionary Approach to Getting Stronger, Happier, Braver, and More Resilient, Powered by the Science of Games. And it is just fantastic. If you describe that as candy.
Oh yeah, I could just sit there and just
Yeah.
I killed that book so
And her
fast.
first book is a lot about how gaming, how we can learn about games that make the world a better place. And this book is really about how we can learn from games to make ourselves better. It's really, really great. If you haven't looked it up, you definitely should. And she has a TED Talk that kind of summarizes it. That's really, really, really good.
I mean, just the kind of things that you would find in Super Better. Gamers spend 80% of their time failing, which is an astounding statistic, and I don't think there's really much else out there that we would do as human beings where we fail 80% of the time. But not only do we keep trying, we really enjoy trying again, like Dark Souls. You just, just keep trying. And so yeah, it's a really great book, the kind of counter to Zimbardo's we mentioned before. I actually have a book with me. That's because that's what I got me a signed copy, and I can't even process that right now. But yeah, so check out all of her stuff. She is kind of the big name in games research. She does have a doctorate, but it's in games-related studies. But all of her work has been thoroughly vetted by psychologists, empirically based, which is great. And why she's on my lead.
Yeah, so if Zimbardo made us take 1 or 2 steps back.
So you like
okay.
this happened like 5,000 times in my panel previously. I kept smacking the mic around. Sorry. Get excited.
Anything else you want to say about the book? It's fantastic.
I'm going to sleep with it under my pillow.
Yes. Sure. All right. Go for it.
Okay, so as a psychologist and a card-carrying member of the APA, this made me really sad. A couple of years ago, they assigned a task force to look at violent video games and whether the implications of playing violent video games on individuals, including adolescents. And when the task force convened and delivered their statements, they unequivocally said that yes, playing violent video games makes you aggressive, which makes, again, is just not good. So I could go into how they did the meta-analysis, and I see absolutely, like, eyes are glazing over. Okay, I have 2 stats nerds. Okay, oh, look at the stats nerds, yeah, okay. So for those who don't know, a meta-analysis is an analysis of a bunch of different studies put together. The idea is kind of like the more studies you get, the closer you're going to get to the true mean, the true average. So they took a look at all these studies and to try and find like the commonality between them. There's a lot of technical stuff that goes into that, like what happens when your measurements aren't the same, and how do you get your effect sizes to be the same, and that kind of thing. But what they did is they originally pulled I think about 117 articles, which is very curious to me because when I typed in like psychology and violence or video games and violence into the Google academic search for the same time period that they did, I found over 1,000. And they just kind of took 100 of them. There's not really clear on how they actually decided on those 100. But then in that analysis, you also have to determine which studies you're going to take and which ones you're not. And that is supposed to be done in terms of the strength of the statistical analysis that they ran. So if they're using something that has your p-value greater than 5, you probably shouldn't use that. The stats are like, yeah, p-values. And so they ended up, I think they ended up with 37 journal articles. Again, 37 out of thousands of articles. So it's a really, really actually small meta-analysis. Thank you. And oddly enough, some of the most seminal works in the realm of violent video games and psychology were excluded. And I have no idea why they were excluded. They were really arbitrary lines that were set up for inclusion. And when they ran their analysis, they found this finding that yes, video games are strongly correlated with aggression. But when you look at the studies that are missing, it's really noticeable. Like anything by Chris Ferguson was taken out, and he's written like 20 papers on this topic. Another issue is that the people in the task force, 3 of them had previously published extensive studies citing video games as inducing aggression. So there's concerns that maybe they're biased. Since you've already staked your reputation on believing this one thing, then maybe. And so there were just a lot of inconsistencies, and if you wanted to, I actually wrote an article that the intention was for me to go through each one of the studies they picked and nitpick at why these studies are bad studies. But the first study I found within that meta-analysis was so bad that it took me a week to write just one. So I published it on a site called Pixelkin, and I can share that later. But basically, an example of one of the studies they used, it only had males, so it didn't have any women in it, or they were very, very minority. The stats were kind of wonky, they didn't really quite make sense, your p-values were all over the place, and lots of other fun stuff like that.
Well, and more importantly, they looked at a lot of different games and lumped them all together, and there were games that were all very similar.
Oh yeah, that was one of my favorite parts. Yeah. We looked at M-rated games. Oh, okay, so you compared Skyrim to Leisure Suit Larry. Totally analogous, right?
Yeah, 5 games were completely, what was it, like a Resident Evil
and then they mixed
a first-person shooter, a third-person shooter.
Yeah, they mixed shooters, they mixed like person, whether first or third person, which of course are going to give you totally different experiences. And we as gamers know that. But yeah, it was just, they don't know what they're doing. They know the psychology, but they don't know the game side of it. And it really, really showed. Yeah. However, oh, my favorite slide.
And again, this is scary because if we thought Zimbardo spoke for psychology, like this is actually
psychology speaking to us, yeah.
Games, this is what happens. And then this happened.
And then this happened. Over 200 psychologists, victimologists, and other academics wrote to protest the task force. Basically saying what I just said, is that your methodology stinks, and your selection process is questionable, and your board members, we have some questions about their unbiasedness in this situation. So there's really no, unfortunately at this point, no resolution. But on one hand, you have the APA saying this, and then on the other hand, you have people who are actually experts in this field. These are not just casual, psychologists doing a meta-analysis. These people who are protesting are ones who have done their research in games and in mental health and victimology and aggression and things like that. So I think it's a really powerful statement that the APA does not speak for all psychologists, and that there are a lot of people out there at the academic level fighting to reduce the stigma associated with games that continues to be perpetuated, even though there is a really large body of literature showing that the effect sizes and the significance levels for any kind of aggression after playing a violent video game is null, especially if you use multivariate analysis instead of bivariate analysis. And
you described it when it says an average of biased opinions. I think that's right. Your opinion of the report. And a meta-analysis is that. It's like you're kind of just like picking and choosing. And there's another type of study, right? Which is the time that you do in a lab and you can reproduce, right? And last year, psychology had another small problem. It showed up in the news where this organization came up with the idea that they were going to try to replicate a lot of different studies. And they found that they could only replicate 39 out of 100 random samples. So obviously of all psychological studies, that's kind of absurd. But it brought up the issue that, well, can we actually replicate a lot of the studies that are being published? Is it even possible? And so there was a lot of talk about that. And now my favorite part is that the backlash to that was headlines like this one, like psychologists called out the study that called out this field of psychology. Yeah, because it's always like self-correcting itself. So after we had that huge crisis of people going crazy, like psychology can't be trusted. It's like, well, you can't trust the thing that came out that said that. And it was, I think that was a big deal, and it's something that's we're going to be talking about it in psychology for a really long time. But thankfully, it kind of balanced itself out at that point, because it was just one report, and then that report got attacked. That's kind of general.
Like you do in academia.
Yes.
Someone says something, and so you write a strongly worded letter that is completely polite, but also vicious. And you just make inferences about their letter. You don't actually call her out. Yeah, all the academics are like, yeah, that's how it goes.
And so we're talking about very specific type of research, peer-reviewed, but that's not the only research that goes on in the world of gaming. Like last year, when in the news, so actually, League of Legends publishes a lot of information on gamer behavior, and they have just so much data. It's fantastic. But last year we found this really interesting thread. It started going on Reddit, and there was a motherboard article, and essentially the riot went and took 2 psychology tests and kind of put them into a survey and started sending them to players who
got banned for having naughty usernames. I would say that I'd probably get in trouble. And I mean, part of the backlash to this was, why are you experimenting on me? And I know Josué and I had a really good conversation about the ethics of this particular. I mean, I think this is fascinating, and I love that they're testing. They have psychologists, and they're trying to learn, and they share their data. But there is this idea of the ethics of administering an assessment to somebody who's not an informed participant. So yes, you don't have to play League of Legends, and no, you don't have to take the survey, but you do if you want your account back. And if you, I mean, you have to change your naughty name, but you can have your account and your skills.
No, it was to get a coupon to not have to pay to get your name back.
There you go. Coupon.
Yeah. So if you filled out this survey, then you didn't have to pay to change your name. Otherwise, you'd have to pay for it.
Right.
So it was like special offer.
Yeah, so you didn't have to do it technically, but at the same time, people don't know what they're taking. They're not, I mean, if you were to go into a psychology experiment, I really, really sincerely hope that the person giving you the examination would give you a letter of informed consent, which tests you for your rights as a participant. You can withdraw at any time without any kind of harsh penalties. So there's this really interesting idea of ethics and whether or not psychological ethics were violated in this particular instance, because the measures they're using are validated empirical measures. So I think it's fitting, the narcissism scale. So there are, one of the assessments was specifically for narcissism. And I think there was aggression, right? So they're trying to understand what is motivating players to engage in this kind of behavior, to do things that they know are against the rules, but they engage in it anyway.
Or if the name is associated with behavior like that.
Right. And so they got reported, and so basically this is their purgatory, this is their penance that they sent. And it's always so difficult because, again, on one hand, as the researcher, this is fascinating. Your population base is enormous. I mean, how many people play League of Legends? Like in here, how many people? You know, here's an interesting question. Have any of you gotten this survey? Oh, man. It's okay. You probably shouldn't have told me anyway. That would be unethical too.
No. Right? Like this was the discussion that we had about this, right? Because
we had different opinions.
Yeah, because they presented it as a survey. There's no consent, there's no IRB, there's nothing, right? There's no review process. It was kind of, they made a thing and they sent it out to people. So if they did talk about it, it wouldn't be.
But I don't want anybody to call themselves out.
True. What I'm saying.
And we could ask them what their naughty name was, but other than that.
Yeah.
So
we went back and forth on the ethics of it. Yeah, there's something very strange about taking a validated measurement tool and then just kind of throwing it out there because we don't know what they're doing with that information. So there's a lot of concern, but
it's also really cool.
It's awesome. I hope they keep doing it and they publish it and they tell us all about it and we can see all the data.
Yeah, Riot in general is really, really good. They've done some fascinating work in the field of psychology and games. They did a study where they changed the feedback color. So like if you got feedback in the chat box, if it was blue versus red, they actually found that red made people angrier and act out more than if it was blue. And again, typically I would go, okay, I want to see the data, I want to see your sample size, that seems kind of odd, but considering the size of the population of people who play and how many times they can run the data, they are like a powerhouse when it comes to understanding the dynamic between games and psychology in general. And again, the person running this, I don't know his tag. His tag is Light, L-I-T-E, but he is a psychologist, and he has my dream job, so get at me, Riot.
67 million players every month. I know, the data.
I know. Oh, look at the drill here. All right. I think we're good on League of Legends. Yeah.
Okay. So before we even start talking about this, take a picture of that slide, look up that talk, because it is fantastic. It's on the GPC Vault, and it was one of the things that was really, really exciting last year. If it wasn't evidence so far. This is the year in psychology, things that we liked, and we've got us excited too. And this is definitely a big one.
So for anybody who doesn't know, GDC is the Game Developers Conference. It's kind of the APA of the game world, or the Oscars of the game, I don't know. It's really, really like the big thing. And so if you can speak at GDC, you are legit. So Ben Lewis Evans is a researcher and doctor, obviously. And he had this fascinating talk at GDC, again, which you can find on the Vault, has all of their GDC talks there. And specifically looking at why are people trolls in games? I thought I did a disclaimer earlier. So the first thing that he looked at was that antisocial behavior in games is an issue. And I don't think I need to back this up with any data. I'm pretty sure everybody here has either perpetrated or been on the receiving end. No, not asking for that. That sometimes people are not nice in games, and sometimes they do things that ruin the experience for other people. I see some people nodding their heads, not going to answer that. So that's kind of the first thing that he established. The second thing he established is that player behavior is more like a spider web. People think of behavior as a chain of events, like A to B to C to D, and that's not how behavior happens, especially in a game. A game is a system of rules that work together to produce meaningful outcomes or have meaningful choices. So if a player's acting a specific way in a game, it's not because of A leads to B leads to C, but because of a confluence of different factors that come together to produce that behavior. And then the idea that game systems often unintentionally reward people for being trolls. And I think that the best way to kind of emphasize that is with Halo. Do I have any Halo fans in here? Like 6 of us? Awesome. I'm a huge Halo nerd, massive Halo nerd. And so for those who are familiar with Warzone, there's this really awesome armor set called the Achilles armor. And everybody wants it, and it's really, really difficult to get. So it's highly valued. This is a thing that gamers want, and we're going to hold it from them unless they get their kill count up. You have to get specific commendations in Warzone, which is slaying and killing other players. Well, Warzone is not necessarily a slaying game type. You want to capture and destroy the enemy's core. Like, that is the main objective of the game. You do get points for killing, and you do get points for taking down AI bosses, but the main thrust that you want is to take out the enemy core. So what gamers discovered is that if you don't complete the objective of killing the core, you can really rack up kills. You can start grinding, and stat padding is another term for it, so that you get your kill count up, which means it's easier for you to get Achilles. And so this is an example of a giant AAA studio who's like, hey gamers, here's your objective. This is what we're going to reward you to do. Now go do it. And then they're surprised when people are over here where the rewards are as opposed to the objective. So that's kind of what Ben Lewis Evans meant by game design, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes intentionally, rewards players for doing the wrong thing. So think about any game you play, and if someone's engaging in, behavior that is antithetical to the goal, it's really interesting to ask why. Like, are they being rewarded for that? So if you're playing an objective game type and someone keeps slaying, is it because they get more points for slaying? Or is the community goal of planting the bomb or capturing the flag or whatever it is that what you get rewarded for? Because gamers are highly motivated and we really like rewards and shiny objects. So we're going to go to the shiny object. So if you're designing a game, make sure that the shiny object and what the player has to do to get the shiny object are in line with each other.
And we're talking about antisocial behavior. We forgot to define that at the beginning, right? So I meet a lot of people who, when I talk about antisocial behavior, they think, oh, you don't want to interact with people. But in psychology, really what it's talking about is behavior that goes is against people or against the norm. And so this is an example of an incentive that rewards everybody going against, and we agree, we're going to play Warzone, that's the thing we're going to do. But no, there's a group that is doing this over here, and 343 created that problem.
They created that system.
Warzone's not fun for me because you're trying to get your IQ up.
I don't have it, so if anybody has a company that is close, hit me up. My company is not close. And then the last thing that Ben Lewis Evans talked about specifically was that game designers have the power to control player behavior. Game designers are the arbiters. You decide the rules, you decide the rewards and who gets them and how they get them. So when you're designing your game, really keep that in your mind. So for example, anybody here play Destiny? Okay, a couple. The loot system in Destiny, like when you find the cave, and then they like shut it down. And then you go find another cave that gives loot, they're like shut it down. So they're very not into designing necessarily what you want as a player. But an even better example is Journey. Have you ever played Journey? Okay, a lot of people. So in Journey, it's actually physically impossible to troll someone. You cannot do damage to anybody else. You cannot interfere with their gameplay. The only thing you can do is help. And I think that's one of the reasons Journey is so popular and why it got such good reviews and is regarded so highly, is because the only interaction you can have with other people is positive and helpful, and that you need that interaction in order to be successful in Journey. So this was a game that was specifically designed to address issues of trolling, of antisocial behavior, and just make it not really possible.
Yeah, and I don't know how much people enjoying that game really has to do with that in particular, but it's impossible for somebody to come in and mess up your game. And the Destiny example that he uses in the presentation is, when you use your super, all of a sudden all these orbs come out, and then all of your teammates can pick them up. So everybody's just helping each other constantly. And the closer you are to your teammates, the more towards that objective you're working, then everybody benefits from it. And that was designed specifically because when you cooperate, everybody's on board. And on competition, you're always leaving people either aside or somebody's getting, somebody's not having fun.
Hey, teamwork makes the dream work. So.
That's yeah.
But this is also really important to emphasize is that this study also found the only reliable predictor of people leaving a game is if they've had a negative experience with another player. So whether they're interested in the game, or the game breaks, none of that was significantly related to how long a person spent their time in the game. So as for any game developers out there, that's a really important message to take home to the higher ups, that the less negative toxic interaction somebody has, the longer they're going to spend it in the game.
You give a Dota 2 example specifically, right?
Yeah,
the number one reason for people to not come back to the game wasn't how hard it was or how bad they were being, it was just how mean people were to them throughout the whole process. So, that means a lot. And we went into a big discussion about, why does Nintendo not have, not allow chat at all in any of their games?
Because it's family friendly.
What are they doing? So there's different ways to do it, and nobody's figured out exactly the best way. But there are lots of examples out there, and I think that that's something that we'll be keeping an eye on. And then things like Journey and the supers and Destiny, they go on the pro-social side, right? You design completely in the opposite direction of antisocial. That's great.
Yeah, and that it can be done. So game designers, it's up to you.
And then another one of our favorite presentations from last year.
Well, this was actually 2016 this year. This was last month. So this is cutting edge stuff. It's actually locked behind the vault, so you can't actually view it, but we're going to give you a sneak peek anyway. So this lovely gentleman's name is Nikki. He is a doctor of communications, I believe, and he works for a place called Quantic Foundry, which I would encourage you all to go check out because they've really asked what kind of gamer personality type I am. And I'm not a big fan of those because they tend to be very BuzzFeedy. I don't do that. But it helps you identify what kind of games you like to play and how that matches with your personality. And it's a really interesting thing that he's got going on. But so they made this model basically where people would answer these questions about personality, about game preference, what is it about the game that you like, and how often do you play games like this? And it generated this really fantastic looking heat map. I don't know how good the color comes through, but on the far right, or my right, your left, the yellow is a cluster of things that people like about games and how they kind of are situated together. And this is a proximal model, meaning that things that are physically close together are highly related. Things that are further apart are less related. So everything in this yellow cluster is story, design, and fantasy. So people who enjoy that aspect of games, think like Minecraft, fall into this immersion creativity bubble. Those are the kind of games they like to play. The ones in the blue is competition, strategy, and
challenge.
Completion, strategy, and challenge. So these are people like StarCraft. They are in the achievement mastery. It's all about the shiny trophy. It's all about, yeah, I know, you perked right up. Getting your gamer score up and being the best at something. And in the bottom right-hand corner is the action social cluster, which are people who like competition, excitement, community, so like very social gamers in that sense, and of course destruction, blowing things up, because that's important. I fall into the red category, just I took the test and I'm actually a social gamer. So basically he found these 3 clusters, and what he did that was really fascinating was that he then mapped them to personality traits. Is anybody here familiar with the Big 5 personality theory? Okay, got a couple here. So for those who don't know, it's kind of the gold standard in psychology for measuring personality. So OCEAN, if you ever need to remember it for an AP quiz, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So that's what it stands for. Probably not what you think it is, but we'll get into that. So he took these clusters and found that they matched really closely with aspects of personality. So for example, people who are higher in extroversion tended to be the ones who wanted to be in the action social groups. They like to blow things up, they like to compete, they like to hang out with their friends, and they like to compete. And of course, extroversion in this sense, in this personality sense, is not just, hey, I'm really outgoing, but I'm a social person. I like to try new things. I'm adventurous. I really do put myself out there. And then for people who are in the mastery achievement category, again, these are like your StarCraft. These are your like trophy hunting, achievement hunting, completionist types. They tended to score really high on conscientiousness. Now, conscientiousness and personality is related to openness to new experiences, planning ahead, having a strategic mindset, so you can see where the overlap really comes in. And then on the far right, he found that the 3rd cluster corresponded strongly to openness. And this term openness is to new experiences, you're willing to try new things, you like to customize your experience, you want to design your own interactions, and not oddly at all, it was correlated with the idea of immersion and creativity. So there's this idea that the kind of game you like to play, if you find yourself in a certain area, don't limit yourself by genre, but like, are you a strategy person? Are you more of a social person? That these map to distinct personality traits. And what's so important about this is games are often identified as an escapist avenue. Like, oh, well, you play games because you don't want to deal with your life, or because you want to be somebody else. But if you buy what he's saying, then games are actually a way that we manage our identity and become more of our true selves, more of who we really are. Because if we're playing games that are in line with our personality, we are actually expressing our internal ways of processing the world and of seeing the world, as opposed to trying to escape and become somebody else.
And your life may not have that many opportunities for you to be yourself. So gaming gives us an incredible opportunity to do that. And I love the way this lays it out, because I look at that, I'm like, I'm definitely conscientious, and I can think of like, that's why I puzzle games, that's why I care about trophies, and you know, maybe my job doesn't allow me to feel that way all the time, but the job, but you know, trophy hunting does.
Oddly enough, my job does not allow me to blow things up.
Yeah.
I really wish it did, but the therapy room is not conducive. I mean, things blow up in the therapy room, let me tell you.
That's not
just not in that kind of way.
Those are the big studies that we saw.
Yeah, that's kind of like the main points that we wanted to hit. Again, I thought of this panel as like a too long do not read of the past year in psychology and games. Yeah, so we got one more.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch real quick on like predictions and things like if we were to do this next year, right?
In the future.
Yeah, when we come back, what would we talk about next year? And I think VR is on everybody's mind, right?
It's definitely on yours.
I just got to do PlayStation VR this morning, so I've hit all of them, and there's actually been research on VR for 30 years.
Yeah.
There's been VR experiments and things going on in universities at the military level for 30 years, and there's so much stuff out there, but now it's finally hitting consumers. You know? Does anybody here have an Oculus at home? Or, yeah, okay.
You're my new friend.
Yeah.
We're new friends.
Right. Anybody cover like any of the upcoming ones? Anybody?
Okay. We can be friends too. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
I assume this will be different. I still believe VR is going to be everywhere next year. And the other thing about behavior that we talked about, Dota, all the data that we have, I think we're going to, you don't even have to ask those sort of questions anymore. We're getting to the point where we can do analysis on your behavior without consulting you. We're just monitoring things and looking at that. And I think we're going to talk a lot more about that.
And we're going to talk a lot about the ethics of that.
You signed, right?
Yes, I'm doing all my rights.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing with VR, I think another one of the things you're going to see coming up is specifically games and psychology is the idea that, oh no, VR is stealing our children and playing a VR game will make you violent. Gonna kind of, yeah. So this idea that whatever the kids, quote unquote, are doing is somehow dangerous is something that's been going on forever. And I mean that because Plato, as in like, not like fun stuff, but the old, really old dead guy, he actually said that pencil was a really bad idea because how can you engage in verbal rhetoric if you're writing things down? Which is funny because someone wrote it down. And certainly the printing press, people were freaking out that people's minds would be overloaded with so much information, which actually sounds a lot like the internet. Jazz was evil, we know that. You know, sock hops were evil at some point. The great comic book burnings of the 50s, Dungeons and Dragons being noted as a cult in the 80s, video games being horribly violent. You didn't know about Dungeons and Dragons as a cult? I thought everybody knew that. I thought we were all in the cult. Yeah. So right now I think we're starting to see video games wane off of that, but I think you're going to see it ramp up in VR. Because what happens, and we don't see our children's faces anymore. And
the day the first person's house burns down because they were in VR, they didn't notice. That's it.
Yeah, so I think that's the next big thing that's going to be on the horizon is how VR is destroying our children.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the circle of life. It's consistent. It keeps us employed.
And so we alluded to a podcast that we do. We almost every single week we talk about psychology and technology and a lot of gaming. Like on Superbet alone, we did 3 episodes.
Yeah,
it's pretty good.
It's good.
Yeah, so you can check us out there. And if you're interested in hearing more of these discussions, or if you want to contact us about anything.
Or if you have something you want us to talk about. I mean, because we're not just game related. We actually did an episode on dating robots and the psychology of having.
Don't date robots.
Oh yeah, so don't date them. Don't date them. Skynet does not love you.
Fun fact: we started doing the show just because
of Black Mirror.
Of Black Mirror. We're literally to talk about this. This is amazing.
If
you haven't watched Black Mirror, watch Black Mirror.
Anybody know Black Mirror? So it's on Netflix. It's a really great show. It's a kind of like dystopian future. No, what's The Door, The Scary Door. What's that show called? Twilight Zone. Thank you. It's like Twilight Zone meets social media, and it has some really deep commentary on that as well. So we started with that, but we've expanded to like, do you date a robot, and can you love a robot? Can a robot love you? Would you go to a FaceTime funeral?
Smart diapers.
So yeah, we just talked about smart diapers, because soon that will be a thing I have to worry about. Because one of us is pregnant, we won't tell you who. My diaper can tweet at me and say, hey, the diaper's wet. So, we talked about all those different things and kind of the psychological consequences of what would happen if a baby never had to cry. Would it develop language, or would it just, I don't know, would it be like one of those little pork babies in a pod? I don't know.
That's our plug.
That's our shameless plug. We are going to have time for Q&A, it looks like, so there's going to be a lovely enforcer who's going to be in that center aisle, so if you would like to ask a question of Josué or I, please step right on up. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for coming, and hope you enjoyed it.
So I do have a question to follow up on the sort of offhanded observation about how VR may be the next sort of wave of the children.
Yeah.
So at the very least, there is a potential difference in terms of physical activity levels and whatnot. And I'm wondering what the current state of research in, if not addictive behavior per se, at least compelling experiences that have different sort of physical health ramifications, and how that matrixes into this notion of computer gaming as you currently see it.
Well, right now VR is, most of the research on VR, at least academic research, is focused on using VR as a treatment. So like as a sensitization treatment for PTSD or for exposure therapy and things like that. So that's where most of the hard academic research is. As far as the addictive components or the more behavioral components, There's not a whole lot there, at least not yet. Obviously, a lot is in the works, a lot of things are being developed into. There is a tendency for society to have these cycles where there's all the new shiny thing is scary and new. But at the same time, if VR is something new, we're going to have to look at it. But yeah, unfortunately right now, I think the research is really limited to mostly medical trials because they have the funds for it, whereas an average researcher like myself, I don't have an Oculus yet. I can't really run a study on it quite yet. What about you? What have you guys been doing?
On the physical component of it, right, we've seen how things like the Wii and dance pads and things like that people get very involved. So in VR, there's a very degree of physical activity involved with it, where it depends on the game. And I think we're going to see interesting things like physical treatment or anything like that maybe has a more immersive component. So you'll see, we know that VR has been able to act as anesthesia almost, right? Because it reduces pain. So I can see a lot of that stuff combining and coming together. But I think it'll be based on a lot of stuff that we've seen. That, some people like the physical activity, so they'll get tired sooner than if they're just sitting down. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what actually really comes back.
It's a good question for next year, though.
Yeah.
My question was about the state of the field right now as far as what's been done with like fMRI and PET scans, like people playing games. Has there been a lot of work on that, or are there still just severe technical limitations on what you're able to do, imaging people and trying to like analyze what's going on in games? Like positive benefit is part of like what sectors and what's really lighting up, what's really getting there, and especially for like when people who have like say depression or other things that you can see on these scans, how their brains react differently to stimuli.
And there is quite a body of research that's growing as fMRIs become more available and games become more worthy of actual serious research. There's a lot of them right now just tracking more the areas of, or rather the blood flow of certain areas of the brain and what activates, what neurochemicals are activated when you play. There was a big study that came out saying that video games are the same as cocaine because they activate your dopamine pathways in the same way. And I'm like, well, there's only so many dopamine pathways, and guess what? When you eat chocolate, it happens too. But I still eat chocolate. So, I mean, one is tough because the field of neuroscience is young and it's still developing, and there's a reason that when you go in for brain surgery, they poke different parts of your brain to see where they are, because every brain is different, we still don't know enough about it to like, this is where language is. So, part of the infancy of neuroanatomy is holding back that research, but people are looking at it specifically as it relates to mental health, like how does somebody whose brain that's depressed, how does that function differently from someone who doesn't have a depressed brain? I don't think they've put two and two together with games yet, saying, okay, this is a depressed brain on video games, this is a non-depressed brain on video games. And if there is, I'm not aware of it, you know?
There's just a trend in psychology and neuroscience overall toward more fMRI studies, more actual seeing what's happening in the brain versus the behavior. And that wasn't the case until
very recently.
Yeah, and now more and more people are coming with a light bulb and like, oh yeah, maybe we should actually measure something instead of just look at the person and see how they're behaving. And in VR in particular, there's just one example. I forgot the name of the company, but they have this simulation where they kind of map the brain, and then as you're doing, they have you hooked up to a machine that's looking at the things that are lighting up in the game. You're moving through your brain, your model of your own brain in VR, looking at those things. It's pretty cool. So people are definitely thinking about it, and I think one of the biggest problems with VR and gaming in general is that now you have to go into a new machine, or you have to put all these things on top of you, and then if you're connected to all these things, how natural, how close is that to your actual gaming experience if you're connected to 20 machines at the same time? So there's issues with that research too, but people are definitely thinking about it more and more, and it's exciting because I think we should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I was at the earlier talk, so thank you again. It was great information. I work with students with learning disabilities on the autism spectrum and or mental illnesses at Boston College. And I wanted to know if there was any research that you came across which shows a correlation between video game use and increased cognitive development. And increased cognitive development. particularly with executive functioning, so strategizing and organizing. I would like to start incorporating gaming with my students, particularly with ADHD and ADD. And if any games kind of come to mind that would increase that cognitive function.
So there's some research, I can't cite specifically who or what, email me later and I'll try to find out. But I know there is talk about using VR in particular to practice spatial reasoning, right? And then by exercising that in a very fine-tuned and designed way, you can improve executive functioning in ADHD. At least that's the theory, right? So now we're going to be able to do that a lot more because we can buy Oculus, because we can actually go to the store and buy them, and more people will be able to experiment and possibly try these treatments out with their kids. But there's definitely a connection that people are talking about that. Yeah, absolutely.
There's also, I call her Dr. Daphne V because she's got a really fancy Swedish last name and I can't pronounce it. But she has a TED Talk. It's Your Brain on Action Video Games, I think is what it's called. And so she actually had, I think they were adolescents, they played video games. And then she noted development in 3 central areas that had to pertain to attention. So like orienting attention, so something snaps, I look at it, I'm able to orient. Another section in the parietal, I think it was, where somebody was able to discriminate stimuli. They're able to stay and maintain focused attention. Yep, and then there was one in a different part of the brain, I'm not a neuroscientist, a different part of the brain that also had an attention function to it. That's specifically for first-person action games because there is so much visual stimulation, and it was specifically for ADHD. And there is a lot of research out there showing that if someone's playing a really cognitively, visually intense video game, they do have increases in things like prefrontal functioning, focusing of attention, things like that. The trick is, though, it has to come from someone who's naive to video games. They found people who hadn't played, and then they track the progress. But if somebody's already playing, there is a cap on how much they're going to develop. And it's tough because 97% of adolescents already play video games, so the increase may not be as noticeable. That said, a game like Minecraft is fantastic for anything from spatial reasoning, like how do I orient this box, to strategic planning, executive functioning of if I want to make a castle, I'm going to need to plan ahead and have these materials, I'm going to need to stack them in a specific order, or I'm going to need to collect these sorts of resources. So
I believe in the idea of gaming prescriptions, right? There are very specific games that will exercise a part of your brain. Your brain is just like any muscle. If you exercise that part, it can help to do that thing. Right? Like, playing one game will not help you do things that are not in the game. So if you exercise that one part, it can be beneficial for that. It takes practice and with a good gaming treatment plan.
Yeah. Play more video games.
Yeah.
Hello there, I'm Jordan Hamlin from Black Man and Robin, and I'd like to ask, has there been a lot of research into like the addictive, intentionally addictive aspects of a lot of supposedly free-to-play games? And if so, has there been an inquiry into what can be done to protect consumers who may be at risk for basically to fall prey to exploitative stuff that's intentionally addictive and potentially costly?
So I think the gambling industry is the one where all that has happened and the parallels are right there. Right? I mean, I don't know if we'll get to a point where there's a warning on a video game the way there's a warning on a lottery ticket, right? About if you think you have a problem with gambling or something like that. So I think a lot of the gambling research is
what's interesting is that people talk about video game quote-unquote addiction, and clinically speaking, addiction is a chemical issue, meaning that you have introduced a chemical into your body and it changes the neurochemistry in your brain. Gambling is more of an impulse control disorder, and it has to do with compulsive behavior. And they're finding that people who have difficulties with video games and with managing how much they play, they tend to be more on that impulse side. There's a psychologist in DC who I've worked with who specifically treats video game quote-unquote addiction the way he would treat OCD. Because the idea isn't so much that you're introducing a new chemical into the brain and altering the neurochemistry and neuroanatomy. What you're doing is that you're having someone who's having difficulty controlling the compulsion to play and controlling the thoughts about playing. That said, there's some people who can go to a casino and spend $5 and walk away. There's some people that can't. There's some people who can sit down and play Skyrim for 18 hours, hello husband, and then walk up and have a normal life afterwards and it'd be fine. There's some people who sit down for 5 minutes in Candy Crush and they're hooked. So it's really difficult. The term addiction itself is very tricky because if you take cocaine, you will get addicted to cocaine, and that's just the nature of the quote-unquote drug. So reframing games as, or reframing the struggle with games as more of a behavioral, obsessive, compulsive type of thing is going to be, I think it's something you're going to see more and more in the literature and the way that we want to address people who have difficulty with their gaming habits.
Hello. First of all, I just want to say, Kelli, I remember when you were doing your dissertation, your panels were like scarce, like they were barely filled up, and like now you're packing house, so I think that's great. I've been following your work since like way in the beginning, but I just wanted to say, so my question is, we think about data and we start drooling over it because it's like 67 million people. That kind of data, you can be able to comb through it, it's delicious. But for someone like, like a journalist, I write about behavior and psychology. Where would you find the data that you need in order to be able to, let's say there's a game designer, they want to know more data about like what type of games or mobile games women really like to play, or what type of RTS games are more common for children. Where do you find that kind of data to start picking brains and start deciding what you should start building and creating?
Well, I don't know of anybody that does data sets. I mean, there's a lot of industries where you can just buy a data set and then analyze it. I don't think games is there. I know for my
dissertation. Companies will specifically sell.
Right.
I don't know if Riot will sell that information.
I hope not. But as I mentioned in my dissertation, I went to the forums. Like I leveraged my gamer cred for what it's worth, and went to the forums and asked people to take it, and I ended up with 300 respondents, which is not 6 million, but it's still large enough for me to dance and to be happy. So I mean, part of it is just going to where your population is. One of the challenges right now in current research are samples of convenience. So universities will say, hey, come to the study, and then of course all 500 kids enter a site who need the extra credit go through the study. And it doesn't matter whether they're gamers or identify as gamers or they play RTS or maybe they've never played anything at all. So if you want a data set, it's unfortunate at this point you really kind of have to go out and get it yourself, or have somebody either run the survey for you or leverage contacts like us who would be more than happy if you had a survey to tweet it out or to put it on social media and send it to other people. At this point, it really is about who you know and how you can leverage your social networks to get those kinds of respondents. And then keeping in mind that a sample set of 50 is fine to do an introductory analysis. A sample set like that would be, you could publish something like that. So it doesn't have to be these enormous numbers, because enormous numbers carry their own problems. That means anything that happens is going to have a p-value that's significant. Doesn't mean that it actually is significant. You have to look at your effect size. But I mean, the very first study I ever did, I had 7 people and they were my housemates. And I drew from that. Obviously, it's not going to be winning any kind of Pulitzer Prizes or anything, but that started my research. And then any pro tips?
Well, on the other end, right? Again, the 67 million players. If companies are willing to open source that data, and I think we're moving toward more and more companies being willing to do that. It's not, there's not going to be any player names associated with it, but now we have trillions of clicks and movements and things like that based on tied to a very specific behavior. And with the data scientists nowadays, like they're so important to us, and they can make sense of that stuff. So the more the companies are willing to open source that data, the better off we'll be. But otherwise, the way we've always been doing it is the way we'll have to do it, right? It's very small experiments. There's so much stuff published too, like the video game research alone, there's hundreds of articles published on the web.
Yeah.
Right? It's really hard to keep up with all of it, so feel your pain. Yeah. Sure.
Thank you.
Hi. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I actually studied adult playfulness was my doctoral research, and I frequently give therapy homework of video gaming or tabletop gaming as part of there are lots of ways that you can fit. I wanted to know about the latest research that actually shows gaming to benefit with anxiety reduction and reducing depression, because there were a few preliminary ones a few years ago that were coming out.
I know there's one of the famous ones was a visual study that people who were depressed when they were ascribed to play Bejeweled a certain amount of times a week, they actually had significant decreases in them. Everybody decreased their depression. So if they were severely depressed, they went to moderately or mild. If they were mildly depressed, they went to non-symptomatic. Again, that's the idea that you're giving your brain the kind of energy boost that needs, but in small doses that you could walk away from. You're not overwhelming. Pretty much anybody can sit down and play one round of Bejeweled. There's another, NIH right now is doing work with an intentional bias game for children who have attention problems due to trauma. I was very fortunate. I helped work on the game through Cardona University, and it's, well, like I said, it's at NIH right now. And it is it's kind of like a Where's Waldo game, but it has like a schoolyard, and on one side are like grumpy faces, and on one side are neutral to happy faces. And of course, somebody who has attentional bias issues is always going to focus on the negative. Well, the hidden numbers are only on the positive side. So by playing multiple times, the idea is that the child will shift their attentional bias away from the negative and to focus on the neutral or the positive, like a cloud or a bush or something. So that's going through trials right now, and it has enough promise that NIH has funded it and has backed it as well.
There were some preliminary studies about reducing isolation with games that are playing with other people.
Using isolation?
Reducing isolation.
Oh, reducing.
Inducing.
Well, yeah, I mean, games are inherently social. I mean, even if you're playing a single-player game like Fallout, guess what? You're probably going to go talk to somebody about it, or you're going to go to a message board, or you're going to want to share the experience. I think over 55% of teenage boys use video games as a way to maintain their relationships. So it's less for adolescent girls, but I mean, there was actually a quote from one boy who said, if we didn't talk about video games, I don't know what we would talk about. So there is that research too. I actually just did a slide deck for an adolescent inpatient treatment center, and I'd be happy to send it to you.
Do you share bibliographies?
Huh?
Do you share bibliographies?
Bibliographies, yeah. I mean, that's what researchers do. We just mine each other's bibliographies. So yeah, I'll send it to you.
And the book Super Better that we mentioned so many references. I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff there. And the main idea, like the main takeaway from that is look at all the specific things we can gain from these particular games, and then playing intentionally, you know, with the purpose of, if that game can do X thing, then have somebody do that to do X thing, right?
Right. So that's why you say it's not homework, it's a challenge. But yeah, email me and I'll send you that slide deck. And we are out of time, but they're gonna kick us out. We're gonna be right outside that store, so please, if you have questions, please come find us in like 5 seconds, and we'll be right out there to answer your questions. Thanks, everybody.